I next invite, and I have very great pleasure in doing so, to take the floor the former Prime Minister of Ireland and the former EU Ambassador to the United States, John Bruton.
Thank you very much. Since I last spoke at a meeting organised by the Resistance, I have spoken to UN High Commissioner Guterres, and he is very actively engaged in seeking individual interviews with all 3,400 residents in Camp Ashraf so that they can be determined to be refugees. He is fully aware that there is an imminent threat of a crime against humanity being committed. I think it's very important for those of us in the Western world to be consistent in our principles. We here in Europe have seen recently a major military intervention in Libya, and the purpose of that intervention was to prevent a massacre in Benghazi. Well, massacres are massacres wherever they occur. Murders are murders wherever they occur. There is no distinction to be made, in my view, between what was being contemplated by the then regime in Libya, which the West intervened to stop, and what is now being contemplated by the current government in Iraq, which the West so far seems unable to do anything to stop. I think it's also probably a bit inconvenient, but nonetheless true to point out that the current situation in Camp Ashraf wouldn't exist were it not for a decision taken by a number of Western leaders in the recent past to invade Iraq and overthrow the then regime of Saddam Hussein. Had that military intervention not occurred, the current threat to the people in Camp Ashraf would not be the case. Now, I believe that those who supported that invasion were properly able to take credit for some of the good things that flowed from it, one of which was a free election in Iraq for the first time in many, many years. They have a special responsibility at this time to take responsibility for and speak up about something very bad that may be about to happen, that also flows from that particular intervention. Therefore, I call on Mr. Tony Blair in person to speak up about the threat to the residents of Camp Ashraf. I call on former President George W. Bush, who has been reminiscing about these events in recent past in a book that he has written. I call on him to address the question of the threat to the people in Camp Ashraf. The President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso, as Portuguese Prime Minister, prominently supported the invasion of Iraq. And he was right, I'm sure, to claim credit for some of the good things that flowed from that, notably the elections in Iraq. But he now has a personal responsibility, I believe, to speak up on this issue. The current Commissioner for Foreign Relations of the European Union, Catherine Ashton, was the leader of the Labour Party in the House of Lords at the time of the invasion of Iraq, and she supported that policy. I think she now has a responsibility to take action in respect of the unfortunate consequence of that policy. I think the outcome we must look for from the meeting tomorrow of the European Union foreign ministers is a decision to recommend economic sanctions being imposed against Iraq unless Iraq agrees to extend the deadline for the closure of Camp Ashraf, to allow time for the duly constituted organs of the world community, the United Nations Commission on Refugees, to individually intervene and interview each one of the residents. The current lack of cooperation by the Iraqi government with the UNHCR is preventing a UN body from doing its job, a job that it wants to do and is willing to do. The European Union should not facilitate such a flouting of the international community or of the United Nations Charter. And just as the West was prepared to intervene in other situations unless it is to be accused of hypocrisy, grave hypocrisy. It must intervene now by telling the government in Baghdad that it will impose sanctions unless the deadline is extended.